So, sober yoga girl Alex McRobert is on the show today to celebrate the release of her book, aptly named Sober Yoga Girl. Alex, all the way from Bali, how are you this morning?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. How are you?
Very good. And I'm great, in fact. And yeah, the time zone thing, Bali, I'm over in Vancouver, Canada. You happen to be Canadian. You're Toronto, I believe, or Ontario region,
Yeah,
correct?
Toronto, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And how long have you been in Bali now?
So I've been in Bali for 3 years this October.
Very cool. Okay. 3 years. Very nice. And obviously, you do pop back to Canada because you have family over here, right?
Yeah, so I was coming back to Canada. Well, I've been overseas for 10 years total. This is
Mm,
going to be my 10th year, which is wild. I
it is.
never thought that I would be away for 10 years when I left home. Left home when I was 23, like for my first job and just like never went back. And in the time, so I used to be a school teacher. So in the time that I was a teacher, I would go home like every Christmas and every summer. And then obviously in COVID, I stayed away for a long time. And then after COVID, I started going again every summer and every Christmas. And this year I was there at Christmas and I think I'm gonna be back at Christmas again.
Very cool. Okay. Excellent. Yeah, what a journey. Yeah, and that's what we're here to talk about is your journey. Just wanted to remember you've been on the show before, so it was, and I remember
Yeah.
the Canadian aspect that we both had and all that. And yeah, the traveling, and then early in the morning as time of recording here, 6 a.m. for you. So I appreciate you, getting up early for this, and you got your tea going on, so that's great. So the book, let's get into it right now. As of yesterday, Sober Yoga Girl was the #1 new release in the category of yoga books in the US on Amazon. So congratulations for that. How does that feel?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's wild, super exciting, but wild.
Yeah.
And, everyone I talk to says, like, it's so exciting. You must be so excited about that. And honestly, I'm behind the scenes, I'm having a lot of anxiety. And
Interesting.
I think the anxiety really comes from it's not the vulnerability of my story being out there because most parts of my story are already there. Like most people have heard a lot of it. What my anxiety is like literally hurting people's feelings. and
Okay.
and
Okay.
I try to write in like the kindest way possible, but I am like a hyper anxious person. And like, for example, like one of my former bosses who I love and I write about so highly in the book, she bought the book yesterday. And it's like, oh my God, in one line, I describe her yoga studio as having a stuffy smell, And it's like everything else is like, I love you so much. You started my career, blah, blah, blah. But I'm here being like, oh my God, what if that line hurts her feelings? And it like didn't occur to me until right now? And
Ooh,
it's
okay.
like just these little things like this that I think I'm just like hyper anxious about. I just want to not hurt anyone's feeling in the
hmm
process, which
hmm
I think is a good thing because it speaks to like how much I want to live my yoga philosophy. And I understand there's an element that's so beyond my control. Like we just do our best to put love into the world and people are going to perceive things the way they want to perceive them.
Sure.
But I'm definitely over here like I'm excited. Everyone assumes that it's just excitement here and I'm definitely over here being like, oh my God, I'm so anxious.
That makes sense, right? Yeah, no, I could see that, right? And it's yeah, I think it's the nature of the human brain. There can be 99% of positive feedback, and the one thing it's really sticks in our craw, and then our brain tends to over process it and potentially dwell on it unless we have a chance to recalibrate our focus. So I could see where that would, yeah, that would be the case.
Totally.
But yeah, like you say, a mix and before we hopped on, speaking of a mix, uh, I asked you, I'm like, well, how's this feeling for you? And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'd love to hear you say it again. You said it was like a little bit sort of anticlimactic, right? I mean, how did it feel to have that book in your hand? I'd love it if you because that was like a great way to start. And I was like, ooh, I should have been rolling right from the get-go, the beginning of the conversation. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. So the books show up to you. This is a 4-year journey, and we'll get into that 4-year journey of writing the book specifically. And then you get the book in your hand, and it was like, oh, it's kind of anticlimactic. So yeah, let's talk a bit about that.
It was so anticlimactic. I and I think that speaks to me all of a sudden realizing like, oh my God, my goal was never to publish this book, which is a cool
Mm,
realization. Like I'm so happy it's published and that I wanted that the whole time I was writing it. But the goal of writing it was always about like my personal healing, my personal journey.
Hmm.
And the achievement was actually in the process. You know, the achievement was in like actually sitting down and doing it. I'll share one thing about the book is that so I started writing it in 2020 when I was just over a year sober. I was like, I think I was 14 months sober when I started writing the book. And one night when I was doing a yoga nidra session, which is kind of like a meditation that gets you into hypnotic state. And I had this sudden memory of like, oh my God, I started writing this book before. It was the weirdest thing. And I
Hmm.
sat up because I was doing it on Zoom because it was in the pandemic. And so I sat up and I started searching my Google Drive. And I had literally started writing this book before in 2017, like right when
Hmm.
a lot of the trauma that the book's about, right when that initially happened was when I started writing the book. But then I got so into my drinking, my alcohol addiction and everything. And so I just put it down. Like I think I wrote five small chapters, some of which are in the new book. And then I just stopped. And so the fact that in 2020, when I started writing, I actually finished it and I actually published it, like that was the achievement for me. You know, it wasn't actually physically having the book. And it was a great
Hmm.
reflection kind of on like sobriety and everything in life, you know, like the real achievement in sobriety is every day that you're sober. It's not like the 1 year or the 5 year that you finally meet. It's like I have every day done the hard work, you know?
Yeah, I love that. It's very easy to overlook that, right? I think a lot, and myself included, I'm getting better with it. But a lot of people are so much of the destination oriented or destination focused that not really having not enjoying the journey, not reflecting on it properly. It's kind of like walking up the mountainside with the blinders on, and you get up there and you're like, yes, I did it, but you didn't necessarily enjoy the way up there. So it's a very refreshing take to hear that he's like you can honestly and genuinely look back on it. It was more so about the process than it was,
Yeah.
feeling it in your hands. And you even said afterwards, after having the book, and correct me if I'm wrong, or if am I connecting dots here, but it kind of feels a little bit like when you're 1 year sober and it's sort of like there's like, okay, now what? So, you
Yes.
have that book and you've opened and you're like, okay, I've put so much energy into this. Now what? Is that correct?
Yes. Or what I imagine. So in the book, I write about I got married, but we never had a big wedding. We just like eloped. And I was thinking this feels like people that have put so much work into planning a wedding, you know, meticulously planned every single thing. And then they wake up after the wedding and they're just like,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah, good analogy. Great analogy. Okay, so I was reading this off your Instagram. And so 4 years, this is for the book, the creation of the book. 4 years, three editors, which we definitely have to talk about. If you're willing to, of course.
absolutely.
67 chapters and over 115,000 words. So this isn't just one of, the ebook of like, 34 pages. This is a pretty substantial piece that you've
Yeah,
created, right?
yeah.
So, what can people expect from it? I'm actually, we had talked about this earlier. We're going to get you to read part of it, but is it a memoirs? Is it mixed with, like what yoga is to you? Is it sort of like a how-to book, self-development? Is it all the above? Like, what can people expect when they pick this book up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously the book has had many iterations when it first like over the years. And so the very first book that I wrote was like I would say entirely memoir. It had two parts and it was just my story. And it was I would say it was less focused. The very first book I wrote was less focused on like sobriety and yoga and it was more really deep into like my trauma. And
Mhm.
then as it progressed and I worked with a few different editors, the first big thing that happened was that my first editor, um, as we went along, the book slowly had like 3 parts and 4 parts and 5 parts and 6 parts and 7 parts. And then at some point I had this idea of like, oh my God, it should be structured based on the 7 chakras.
Mm.
And it all seemed to very obviously fit together for me of like this part is this part, this part is this part, this part is this part. And so that was like the first change where it started to become a bit more educational. And then over time, this was probably a later edition, but during the time that I was working on the book, I started studying yoga philosophy for about a year. I've been working one-on-one with a teacher in Mumbai. And I also have been teaching a course on it. It's a text called Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So I've been studying it very deeply. I've also been teaching. I teach like 5 online groups, and it's become like a big part of my work. And I started making all these connections as I was editing. I would be reading something and be like, oh my God, that's like that thing from the book. And so I would say I probably teach around maybe 20 or 30 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras throughout the book, like just at random
Mm,
points. I will be like, Patanjali states this and this about yoga, and
mhm,
this was my issue. Like I had,
mm,
an example of this is like avidya is spiritual ignorance. It's when you lose your spirituality and you don't, like, you struggle to make sense with what your purpose is on earth. And that
mm.
is like when I was experiencing like states of depression, I was in a state of avidya, and so it ended up drawing in all these different aspects of yoga philosophy. And then the other thing too was that in the very last year, when everything started happening with the war in the Middle East, I started to be like, oh my gosh, I really want to portray this region
Mm.
in a loving way, because I lived there for 7 years. I love it. And so I started bringing in so much about Arab culture, which I wasn't including before. Like I was teaching like what's Eid al-Adha, like why are the mosques decorated the way they are? Like what are some of the things that I learned? And I started taking Quran classes just out of interest. And so I was bringing in a bit of like what I learned there. And so it became a lot more educational as the book process went on, just kind of by my growth. I would say that
Mm.
I got much more into like learning in the last year. And then I just wanted to like share what I learned.
Yeah, very cool. It's an interesting process, when you have a project like this, is 4 years. And especially, yeah, when it is about your own personal growth, and then you can pull in other elements of, things that you're learning in real time with examples of your life, which really helps that content stick, right? We all know the power of storytelling. So it's like somebody can, you could say to one of your classes, like some of the theory, which can appear perhaps dry, right? But then if you can attach one of your personal stories to it, but oh, you're right. And it just connects with somebody in a different way. So really cool how that all lined up. And I imagine that just there's sort of a buzz that you can get from
Yeah,
everything's sort of connecting like that, isn't there?
totally.
Very
Totally.
cool. Very cool. Now, I'm kind of curious about the actual process of writing. We've gotten into a little bit. Was there sort of like a ritual behind it? Was there a certain time of day, you know what I mean, where you just sort of would you have gaps in this 4 years where you weren't writing at all? Like what did that look like as far as you as a writer, what is your process?
A great question. So the very first part of the very first chunk of the book that I wrote, I literally just started writing and never stopped. It
Hmm.
was so intense. The only time I would stop would be, and it was in the middle of summer 2020. So I was off work. I was a school teacher, and I had just started my business, the Mindful Life Practice. So maybe I was teaching yoga like maybe 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day. And generally I would teach in the afternoons in Abu Dhabi. And that was the only time I would stop writing, would be to get on a yoga class.
Mhm.
And it's so interesting because what my parents both read the book when I first wrote it, and then they both read it this year, and both of them said it's so much better than the first one. And I
Hmm.
thought that was so interesting, because I was like, the first one was the hardest thing
Hmm.
I've ever written in my life. And the editing was all the easy part. Like it was like actually writing it that was so hard.
Hmm.
And so I just sat and I wrote like basically nonstop. And then after that, I would say there weren't really significant gaps when I wasn't writing it, because my brain was always thinking about it, and I would have ideas and thoughts. There were chunks like in the first year after I wrote it, I ended up hiring my first book editor, and me and her met on Zoom every single week for a year. And I would
Hmm.
describe it more as like therapy than anything,
Oh, wow,
because
okay.
would look at my book and say, this doesn't make sense. Like she would be like, why did you do that? And I would be like, I literally don't know, you know, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Sure.
And then she would really pull it out of me of like, we have to like figure out why you did that basically. And a lot of my story was really confusing, which I get because it was confusing for me too, like some of the choices I made. And so she really like pulled that out of me. And so that was a huge effort. And then there, right after I worked with her, I tried to pitch my book to publishers, and I ended up spending a lot of time and money on calls with literary agents, getting rejected. And
Mm.
I thought the book was going nowhere, but I am quite glad it got rejected at that point because it had a very different takeaway and very different, I would say, focuses in the early days. And then, yeah, I got back on with my next editors, and I had two more editors, one who did more of like layout and design, and then one who did more of like sentence structure and grammar. And so
Mm.
they all three of them had like really necessary strengths, but I didn't plan it that way. It was just like the next people that I came across, you know?
Got it. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that answered my. I was going to bring that up. Like, what's with the the three editors and what's the benefits of having three different? And you completely answer that question. So very cool. What would you say? Your initial vision for this book, whether it was just a feeling that you had inside of you that you're going, okay, I'm going to start expressing this versus, and even if it's 2017 or we'll say from 2020 to 2024, like how close is your initial vision? If you even had one, was it fairly ambiguous where at the point where we are now, it seems very complete? Or is there like more to come? Like where do you sort of feel on the spectrum of like full completion and like your initial vision and that feeling that you had in the inception of this and the way it came out the other side? Like I don't know if that's the greatest question. Just that's specific topic of yeah, like how you feel about like the finished product versus when you first started.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so proud of it. And I actually happened to look at the book the other day. I was like, I wonder if I could find one of my old versions and just see like how it changed. I didn't read the whole book, but I just pulled up some random section, and and it was amazing. Like it was
Mm.
incredible to see how much it had grown from the original until now. And yeah, the story was definitely not what I originally thought it would be,
Mm.
but that shows how I had grown as a person too over that time.
Right.
And I'm proud of that because the original story, I would say the original book that I wrote, I had a lot of resentment for one
Mm.
period in my life,
Hmm.
and the harm that I perceived had been caused to me. And
Mm.
that's really what the first book was. And then my first editor really teased this out of me in a great way, like of me to reflect on like, okay, yes, some bad things did happen to me in that period of my life, but no one was like trying to harm me. Like no one was out there being
Mm.
like, I'm gonna ruin Alex's life, you know?
Yeah.
It was just the way the life happens, you know, and me being able to have this reframe and then the book to become about so much more than that was the real transition and growth.
It's beautiful. It would have been such a different thing if you just had released that book and then this became a sequel, right? It's I
Yeah,
think the story is within the growth within the process of the book, right? And I can see why that process is so important to you at this stage.
totally.
Yeah, so many layers. Yeah, and there's a lot of people that myself included as a musician, I tend to just try and release something fairly quickly in close proximity to the inception because otherwise I do tend to either overthink it or it really does get away from the initial vision. And that's why I was kind of curious to see what your thoughts were on it. But honestly, like the way that you've laid it out, it really truly needed that time of incubation and growth. You needed that time in incubation and growth, and you and the book really grew and grew together in a sense, didn't you?
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
And I'll share one thing in this interview, which I've shared in a couple interviews already, which is that so a main part of the book it revolves around when I got married when I was 25, and things ended really badly with the guy that I married. Well, I left him like literally 2 months later, and I broke his heart, and it was like something I carried for a long time of like this guilt of like I'm a terrible person because I did this to him basically, and he didn't talk to me for a long time. We had like no connection, and and so I wrote the book in 2020. In 2021, I used to always just try to find him on Instagram because I wanted to just see, like, has his life moved on? And in 2021, I saw that he had gotten engaged. And then must have been 2022 or maybe 2023, I was at home having coffee with someone, and someone told me that he had had kids, like they had seen that on his
Mm.
Instagram. And then in December, I emailed him to say, hey, just want to let you know that I wrote this book. You're in it. You can't be recognized, but like my goal is to just help other women with their mental health and
Mm.
sober journey. And like, I would love for you to read it because it's really important to me to have your feedback. And he emailed me back and he goes, Alex, you're never going to believe this. I'm also 5 years sober. And I also wrote a book about you.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's like, I never planned to publish my book, but I would be happy to read yours and I'd love to share mine with you
Hmm.
and just see like what I can offer you. And so at that point, we didn't connect on Instagram or anything at all, but I just sent him the book and he read it. And I honestly, I'm like, I don't know if he read the whole thing because his feedback points were really from the first section.
Yeah.
I imagine it was probably really traumatic for him.
Mm. Mhm.
And to hear what happened from my perspective,
Sure.
um, I start the book and like basically was like wanting to commit suicide because of what happened.
Mm.
And I imagine that was like really, really hard for him, probably. And anyway, I never read his book, and I suspect that was probably because whatever he wrote, he probably was like, she doesn't need to read this. He never followed up with it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're now connected on Instagram, and he emailed me like 6 months later being like, hey, has your book come out? Like, I want to buy it. And it's
Oh,
just really, really incredible to have that
yeah.
support. And I think the book would have been different if that
Mm.
wasn't like if I felt like I was hurting him or villainizing him or he wasn't supporting the project because
Mm.
of all there's a few ex relationships that are in this book, and he's important to me because we did get married, and it's like I
Right.
want to make sure um that he supports this.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing. Wow. And it's just the way that, the universe works, like the stars align. He just so happens to be writing a book and being, sober the same amount of time as you. Like, wow, that's a really cool part of the story. Thanks for sharing that. I,
Yeah, we both got sober about 2 years after we got married. And
mm,
at the time, I made no connection to these two events. Like, it did not occur to me that, like, what had happened. Like, I don't want to, like, put words in his mouth, but from my experience, what happened was I had this, like, trauma, and then I just, like, drank my way into, like, oh my God, I have to get sober. And so I wrote in the book, like, it's almost like we just came into each other's lives to, like, destroy them enough so that we could
wow.
build
Yeah.
them. And yeah.
And then here you are both coming out the other side, and you can be
Yeah.
completely amicable and friendly, presumably, and and everything else that comes along with it. Yeah, really cool part of the story. You mentioned if you were to just summarize, I mean, it's going to be, imagine, very challenging to, unless there's a few key points. You mentioned one of the key intentions, we'll say, of this book is like mental health, right? And just overall health. What would you say if you were to have just like 3 bullet points of really what the key takeaways or pillars or values of this book? Like what would you say they are?
So I would say, what are the key takeaways? One is that mental health is so much bigger than we think it is in the
Mm.
Western world in terms of like mental health is just mental health. I think it's talked about as a very isolated subject, and we don't understand that it's like spiritual health, it's physical
Mm.
health, it's being in community. And I think my book illustrates the importance of all of these things to recover that go beyond, the simplified Western thing of like, oh, you're feeling depressed, like here's a pill, and that did not solve it for me.
Right.
And what solved it was like all these other pieces.
Mm.
So I think that's a huge one.
Hmm.
And then another key takeaway is the role that yoga philosophy can play in our well-being and
Mm.
the
Hmm.
relevance it can have in our modern world, even if it's so ancient.
Yeah. Right.
And I guess the third is really about sobriety. It's really like you can recover, and here's how I did it.
Yeah, I love that. It's a cool thing when you look at sobriety now and just how, accepted and more talked about, if nothing else, it is, and even the last 5 years or even 10 years, we'll say. And, I look at it, it's a lot more nuanced now than it ever was before. It was like, okay, go to AA or something along those NA or whatever your addiction may be. But I imagine with you, it's like you're pulling in. It becomes so much more nuanced now. It's similar to like if you went to a personal trainer at the gym, it's not going to be just like, okay, it's this way or no way. There's going to be like, okay, well, no, how old are you? It's very nuanced, right? And I think recovery is very much like that as well. And we're accepting that there are different elements and pieces that all really factor into this more of a holistic and spiritual body, mind, spirit way of recovering and becoming sober. And you're one of the people that really, to me, that when I think of it, really personifies that, and just your branding and everything that you've done. So, kudos to you for doing that. And yeah, I'd love it if you spoke on, there's no question there, just the topic. Would love it if you spoke on that as well.
Yeah, totally. Definitely when I went alcohol free, or when I was in the build up to being alcohol free, I didn't realize how many options there were out there. I think as soon as you get into the recovery world, like as soon as you kind of read the first book or get tiptoed in, you start to get exposed to like, whoa, there's actually like a lot out there. Like there's a lot of options, there's a lot of methods, there's a lot of people out there speaking about recovery. And I think you just have to take the first step into this world, like connect with the first person on Instagram or read the first book, and then you start to discover like, wow, there's so many ways to recover. And in my build up to sobriety, I think the biggest thing that kept me from stopping drinking was that I thought that there was only one way, and that way didn't resonate with me. It does now. Like at the time, I was like, I don't think the 12 steps or AA really resonates with me. And the
Mm.
like irony being that I did a 12-step retreat in India, like in February. And so now I think it's beautiful. But at the time I was getting sober, I was like, I can't see myself in that room. And
Mm.
so I think one of the best messages that we can share, and I guess that's one of the messages of my book, is like, there's so many ways to recover. And like, if one doesn't resonate with you, find another one. And there's people out there, and there's like a whole world of resources waiting there out for you. So find what works for you.
Definitely. I love that. Great advice. It really is just a matter of putting that one first step, like you say, the one Instagram profile that you resonate with, and then it just will just continue to blossom and go from there, right?
Totally.
Absolutely. Very cool. I wanted to give you the option and the opportunity to read a passage from your
Yeah.
book, if you can. We'll get back to your book here. By all means, yeah, the floor is yours. Let us know what is this the very beginning, or is this a specific part of the book?
Yeah. So this is the very beginning of the book. I've been reading random passages on my social media. So if you're listening to this and you want to connect, I will just randomly think of something and read it. And when you mentioned this that you would love to hear a part of the book, I felt like reading the very first little bit.
Yeah,
I'm going to read the
excellent.
first page.
Beautiful.
And this is called Chapter 1, The Ending. I was 25 years old when I came closest to dying by suicide. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah. 3:19 a.m. I was half sleeping anyway, but any part of me that was asleep rolled over and woke up to the haunting call of prayer echoing through my apartment. I'd lived in Mabula, Kuwait for 2 years, a few feet away from a mosque, and it had become familiar to hear this call every morning. In most parts of the world, the darkest and the quietest night is right before the dawn, but not in Mabula. By 4 a.m, water trucks were backing up, street dogs were barking, and hundreds of workers were beginning their day. They were waking up in their dorm rooms, descending from their apartments, and forming lines on the road below. Crowded shuttle buses would take them to their construction sites to start their workdays. It was close to 50 degrees Celsius outside, and I could imagine salty sweat was already dripping off these men's foreheads as they stood outside waiting for their buses. I lay in bed hearing the chaos I'd lived amongst for 2 years, but my mind was dissociated from the present moment. Mentally, I had left the here and now. I was floating far above my body, viewing it from overhead. I could see myself curled up in fetal position on the mattress. My imagination took me further, up the elevator to the top floor of the building to the 13th floor. I descended the staircase to the roof. I'd have to climb over the water tanks to get to the ledge. The orange sun would soon be beginning to rise over the neighborhood. I'd feel the hot, sticky, dusty wind on my skin. The sounds from the road below would get quieter and eerier. I'd look beyond the ledge, seeing the tiny workers, the water trucks, the buses, the sand, the dust, and the sky. I'd imagine jumping into the air and feeling nothing as I fell through the sky for a few seconds. My fall would be broken only by the concrete below, blood splattering and limbs flattening, and it would finally be over. Oh my God, wow. I didn't think I was going to get emotional when I read that.
Yeah. No, yeah.
But,
Damn.
wow.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's obviously incredibly powerful. I just closed my eyes about a few seconds in and just followed the visualization essentially that you were providing. That's, yeah, what a powerful way to start the book. And thank you. Just, yeah, I could hear it in your voice. I wasn't sure if you were getting emotional there, but thank you. Thanks for sharing that. That's a good cliffhanger, so to speak. Right now, I definitely want to read. I want to know what the next page says, you know? Damn. Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you
so
know
good.
what's so interesting? So I told you that I started this book in 2017.
Yeah.
And I all of a sudden had this thing of like, oh my God, I think I started writing this book before. And
Yeah.
all I could remember was that I wrote about not this morning, but the morning after this morning.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I ended up staying in Kuwait for the day, and then I had been awake for like 36 hours, and it was the middle of Ramadan in Kuwait, so you couldn't like eat or drink in public, and I hadn't eaten or drank anything. And so I ended up getting to the airport, and I was like so tired, so hungry, and I was like, I need water, or like I'm literally gonna collapse. And I ended up like, so the way I started the book when I wrote it in 2017 was that I like collapsed on the luggage conveyor belt, and I was asking them for water, and they were like, sorry, we can't give you any water because it's illegal to drink, because it was illegal to drink in public, eat or drink in public in Ramadan in the Middle East. And that was how I started the book. And it was like, all of a sudden I was like, I think I've written this book before. And I sat up and I started searching my drive for some words that were coming to my head. Cause I was like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember what I called it, because wouldn't have called it Sober Yoga Girl, because like I wasn't sober. I'm like,
Right.
what is this document? Where is it? Like I don't remember when I started writing it. And then I found this scene. And so I had started the book, not this morning, but like the morning after. And so
Morning
that
after.
morning
Yeah.
after scene, I then put like halfway through the book.
Okay. Okay, nice. Yeah, yeah. So isn't that interesting that this book from 2017 provides these really important, you know, road signs essentially, it sounds like. And yeah, what an impactful time in your life. That's a crazy story in itself too. Falling onto a baggage conveyor
Yeah.
belt and yeah, wanting
And
water and
I
all the
don't
rest. Damn.
And like, I don't know if it would be the same nowadays.
Mm,
I left Kuwait and I didn't go back. And Kuwait is a bit more traditional and conservative, but
mhm.
certainly like where I lived in Abu Dhabi, I was there in Ramadan in maybe 2021 was the last time I was there. And like even Arab people were eating and drinking in public. So it had like totally
Yeah,
changed
totally
in
changed.
that time. And
Yeah,
that
yeah.
this scene wouldn't happen, for example,
Mm,
in Abu Dhabi today. Like they would
mhm.
absolutely be like, yes, we'll give
Yes.
you water.
She desperately needs water. Please give her some.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Right.
so I don't know what Kuwait is like, but
Mhm.
definitely in the time I lived there, I saw a real evolution. But when I was there, it was like very, in 10 years ago, it was like very illegal to eat or drink in public in this time period, which was
Wow.
normally fine if I wasn't like about to like, if I wasn't on like a mental health break.
Right. Yeah, yeah. At that point, yes. There's a little something, yeah, something more going on than the fasting. Something a lot more going on.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting. Do you remember what did you have a working title for that 2017 book? Was there a working title or was it just essentially just some memoirs at that point?
There was no title.
Okay.
I probably got 5 chapters in.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe even less than 5 chapters, but I would just randomly have memories of things that happened.
Hmm.
And a lot of it is not actually in the book because there's a
Got it.
lot, which I'll share on this podcast. There's a lot that I felt like I couldn't say about
Got it.
um Kuwait for various reasons.
Oh, okay. Okay. Got it.
For
Yeah.
reasons of like, I don't want to cause harm, for reasons
Yeah.
of like, so there's many stories that were written that did not make it into the book.
Mm.
And one of them was, so one of them I'll share because I don't think it's like a big deal, but it was basically, I was there in Kuwait working at the school when Donald Trump was elected, and it happened in the middle of the morning because of the time zones. It was like 11 a.m. and my students are Muslim, and they were at an American school, and so there was a lot of confusion over like, what
Mhm.
does this mean? Because they were also 8 years old, so they were like, what
Mm.
does this mean? Like, are we not allowed to go to this school anymore? Like, can we not go
Oh,
to
wow.
America? Like, and they ended up staging a protest, which then we got in
Wow.
trouble for because it was almost as if they thought that we were like influencing this. And like, we were all in shock. Like, we were all
Oh,
like,
shit. Yeah.
like, we were like, we have not put on this protest. Like, we are just like confused.
Yeah, right.
And so that's an example of a story that I put in that I was like, okay, this like probably shouldn't be in the book. Just because it's like, it speaks to like whatever political values, which of kids and things. Like, I didn't really talk about what was
Sure.
happening in the school so much because I was
Yeah.
like, these things like, but yeah, those were the types of things I wrote in the book, and they were just confusing things. Like, like it's a small thing, but it's like, it's just confusing when you're like, I'm 23 and I'm like, why are these kids getting in trouble? Like, when I was their age, I had a protest, our playground was being torn down. We did a protest. It was great. And,
Yes.
so I was like, I don't
Yeah.
understand why this is like such a big, I get why
Right.
it's a big problem, but like,
Sure, sure.
lots of things like that happened that were just like, just confusing things that just needed to be like out of me.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. And I imagine that's where like an editor or just a collaboration with the editor and just knowing yourself, like, okay, I'm sure it's just the way that it makes you feel. You're like, this one I will keep to myself at this stage, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be in the book for any number of reasons at that point, right?
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
my first editor was she's from India. She lived in Mumbai,
Mm,
and that was very, very helpful to have a person of color editing it because she gave me
yeah.
so much feedback on like, she was like, you can't use this name, you can't use this
Oh,
thing. Like,
okay.
I would put things on it that um, there were quite a few chapters about like the traffic in Kuwait, the roads, the driving. And she,
Mhm.
for example, that's a tiny one, but she would just be like, this is a fact of life in Asia, Alex. Like, that everyone in Asia has these, the driving is a problem everywhere. You don't need like 3 chapters about it. And so
Fair.
there's
Yeah.
little things like that. Or I'll give
Yeah.
another example is that, so the guy that I married was from Mexico, and I named him Juan in the book. And he
Mm,
read the book and said, he was like, don't call me Juan, because that is like, when people don't know the name of someone from Mexico, they will just call them Juan, and it can be like an
okay.
offensive joke. And
Got it.
that didn't even occur to
Didn't
me.
register. Right.
It didn't register, no, because I
Right.
wouldn't even think. And so he gave me a list of, he's like, here's 5 other options of
Oh,
like names
okay.
to call me. And so
Right.
little things like that, that it's like, I
Yeah.
just need other perspective because I don't know. I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well put. Don't know what I don't know. And it's like, having that, again, those collaborators and having that feedback lessons, or at least tempers some of that, that release anxiety that you talked about at the beginning, right? Because if you're just self-published, my goodness. I mean, who knows what could have happened. So nice to have those extra filters or those extra,
Totally.
eyes on the project, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, a quote that you had is, well, it's actually a Taylor Swift quote. I want to pop this in here and we'll talk about this. So once we have spoken our saddest story, we can be free of it, which is a beautiful quote. Uh, do you feel that's the case here? Was this cathartic to the point of, like this is as soon as you close this book, figuratively and I guess literally, like you're energetically have completely moved on, or is there still a little bit of, some tentacles to so energetically to some of these stories? Love it if you fill this in on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I would say not only in the book itself, but also in the conversations I had with people around it.
Mm.
And, I gave the example of my ex who I married. That was a big one. And then there's another ex in the book who he's from Australia. And so he comes to Bali often. So I've seen him like probably maybe 3 times in the last 3 years. And I told him about the book 2 years ago. I was like, yeah, I'm writing a book. And he was like, you can write anything nasty you want about me and I won't be offended. And I had to say to him, like, you're not in the book.
Ooh,
Because
ooh.
he was just kind of, we dated for a few months, but he didn't like traumatize me, like, so
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, you're not in the book. And
Right.
then over time, we ended up, we spent quite a few visits together in Australia, or not Australia, in Bali. And we had some really beautiful moments of, reflection on how me and him, he's been in my life. Like we both dated when I lived in Kuwait, and then we dated right before I got sober when I was in Abu Dhabi, and now he's here in Bali. And so we had all these reflections of like how we've both seen each other through like many different phases.
Mm,
And so then in the end, I was like, okay, I'm gonna write this guy into the book because that's like another beautiful conclusion, like of
yeah,
us just coming to resolve, and
cool.
talking about a lot of stuff like
Yeah.
that happened between us. And then there was one more thing that got resolved, which was um I had this really negative experience when I was a student on a yoga teacher training. The teacher was just really he was just really strict, really scary. Our ideologies didn't line up. And that was one story that I wrote in the book, but I was so afraid of him that I took it out and then I didn't know what to do. And then in the end, I ended up running into him at a gas station
Ooh,
like a year
okay.
ago in Bali.
Yeah.
And he was aware, I didn't put this in the book, but he was aware that I had these issues with him because I actually had an opportunity to work for his company a few years before. And I said to one of the people that worked there, like, I'm not gonna work there if I have to be in the room with him, basically, because of what
Oh,
happened.
uh-huh.
And so he was aware that I felt that way, and I run into him at a gas station, and he basically like he apologized for what
Hmm.
happened, and he was like, I was just in a really bad place in my life.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, we ended up sitting down and having coffee, and then
No way.
I think I texted him like a week later and was like, hey, I wrote a book.
Yeah.
Are you okay with me putting this story in it? Because I think it's really nice. And he
Yeah.
said, he was like, yeah, absolutely. Like you can even use my name. I don't
Damn.
mind. And
Yeah.
so there were quite a few things that not everything in my life came to resolve. Like there were a
Mhm.
couple, there's still two people that I wish that I was able to resolve things
Mm.
with, but I don't
Mhm.
think that will um be possible. So I just have to just move forward with what I have resolved.
Very cool. So moving forward, what's next for you now? This book is out. You're on a podcast tour here. Yeah, what's next? Like, I mean, are you feeling a lot lighter? Yeah, what's next? What's in the future? You got some upcoming events? I'd love it. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. So I have been on quite a few podcasts, which is really exciting. I would love to do like some kind of book tour at some point, like some events in some of the places where my community is, but I haven't really organized that yet.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of writing, I actually am working on a second book,
There we go. That
which
was going to be one of my
I
questions.
started working on a long time ago. And so
Awesome.
I said to you that I teach yoga philosophy and I study philosophy, and a lot of it is in my book that I just released, but I only teach like 20 or 30 of the sutras, and there's 200 of them. And so
Mm.
in my course, I teach every single sutra in depth, like what it means, some examples, some stories. And so over the last 3 years, I've been compiling that into a document while I teach it. And
Very cool.
I'm hoping it's what I just met with my first editor on Monday talking about this project. And I think what we're going to do is probably release it as a series because there's 4 chapters in the Yoga Sutras. So it'll be like book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4.
Very cool.
And that hopefully if we move with it, then it will be like a next year type of thing. So it won't be another 5-year project.
Yeah.
It's a different type of
Yeah.
thing though, I will
Yeah.
say,
Sounds
because
like
the
it.
first book was like very much like in my trauma,
Hmm.
resolving my stuff. And
Hmm.
this is much more, it's intellectual, but it's lighthearted because I just research
Mm.
the content and then I have usually a lighthearted story around it. Like it's not about like, wanting to kill myself.
For example, just for example. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Excellent. So it's so funny. I was about to ask you, can we see another book coming out? And you were like, yeah, I got 4 more books coming out next year. Okay. So there you go. It's just the way you work. That's the way you go, right? And you're like, okay, I got 1 book out and that took me 4 years. Now I get 4 books out in 1 year. Okay. I see what's going on here. Right on. Well, we'll have to have you on again when the series comes out. I'd love to talk to you again. I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you. Congratulations again.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, of course. And final way, obviously we mentioned the Amazon thing. Is there a website anywhere else you'd like to redirect people if they want to get to know you better or order the book? Yeah, take it from there.
Yeah, totally. So I would say I'm pretty active on Instagram. My Instagram is Alex McRoberts, so that's a great place to connect. And my yoga community, yeah, we didn't even talk about my yoga community. That's so funny. But my yoga community is the Mindful Life Practice, and I teach yoga online. I run retreats and trainings. So if you're curious about getting involved at all, check that out.
Very cool. And you have if I'm not mistaken, you have a retreat starting like tomorrow or the next, very quickly, right? In the next 48 hours or something along those lines?
Yes, I guess I must have told you that when we were scheduling the show.
You
Yes.
did, yeah, because we were trying to work out a date, and I think it was like Saturday, and of course you're a day ahead of me or something along those lines. I knew it was coming up anyway, so I wanted to give you a shout
Yeah.
out there, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, you're totally right. So it's going to be amazing actually. It's a Vedic meditation and yoga retreat. So my friend is a Vedic meditation teacher and he's brought this group over and he's really teaching a big chunk of it. And then I've been hired to teach the yoga and also do some workshops, but I'm super excited because I'm going to be like when I teach for retreats that are not my own, often I'll just drive in and teach the yoga and then leave. But for this one,
Mm,
I'm actually going to be like staying on site and participating
very
in
cool.
everything. And so,
Wonderful.
yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to it. So that
That sounds
starts this week. So
amazing.
I'll be a little bit offline, which I think will probably be good for me in all
Sure.
the whirlwind that's been this week, to just like decompress a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it seems like everything in your life is you have that intention, that, deliberate nature to you, and so pockets of these things show up for you. Like the timing really is clicking here for you. So that's a testament to the life that you've created for yourself, the, 5+ years of sobriety. By the way, I think we have like a very similar, I remember this like within a few days of each other,
Yeah.
sobriety day, which is really cool.
What's your
April
sobriety?
8th, 2019, and yours is somewhere around there, is it not?
It's April 13th is me. And
Right.
and my birthday is April 7th.
No way. Oh,
So
crazy. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So
so for
cool.
me, that is like it's so funny because that's like a week of like birthday and sober date all happens in one week. I usually celebrate it with like one party.
Yes.
But over time, the sober date, well, not over time, like right from the first year, the sober date became more important to me than the birthday.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they say it's like a sober birthday, right? So it's like this your birthday, and then it's like the recreation or the rebirth essentially, right? A few days later. So very, very cool. Awesome. Always love our conversations. Thank you and congrats again. And yeah, we'll obviously we'll keep in touch as we always do.
Awesome. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.